"You're polluting my terminal with street trash." Trent Lawson tilted his ceramic espresso cup and poured it directly onto Marcus's chest. The heat soaked through thin polyester in under a second. 6 ramp workers. Nobody moved. Nobody said one word. Marcus stood there burning perfectly still and reached into the front pocket of his neon yellow vest.
Insane. He just handed a silent genius the exact weapon to destroy his entire airline. Keep watching.
Marcus had 15 minutes. That was it. 15 minutes in a 10-hour shift. He sat on a cold metal bench near Gate 12, unwrapping a sandwich he had bought at 3:47 a.m. His knees ached. They always ached by this point. The dull, deep, relentless throb of lifting 50-pound bags since 4 in the morning had settled permanently into his joints, a quiet, familiar punishment he never mentioned to anyone. He took one bite. He chewed. He exhaled slowly. Then he saw the old man. The man was standing near the departure board, motionless, confused, completely lost. He wore a frayed, dirty coat that hung loose on his shoulders. His shoes were scuffed and mismatched in the way that suggested genuine forgetfulness, not poverty. He turned left. He stopped. He turned right. He stopped again. His hands moved in small, anxious circles at his sides, searching for something to hold on to in the noise and the blur of the concourse. Marcus rewrapped his sandwich. He stood up. He walked over. "Sir," Marcus said, "can I help you find something?" The old man looked up. His eyes were sharp, alert, and surprisingly clear for a man who appeared so disoriented. "Gate 47, the man said quietly. "I was told Gate 47, but I have been walking for 20 minutes and I cannot find it." "Gate 47 is in the North Concourse," Marcus said. "It's a long walk, I'll take you." The man nodded. He said nothing more. Marcus fell into step beside him, moving slowly, matching the man's pace without comment or complaint. The terminal was cold. It was always cold. The air conditioning ran at a temperature designed for the comfort of passengers in motion, not for the comfort of anyone who had to stand still inside it. Marcus felt the chill through his vest. The sharp chemical sting of jet fuel drifted in from the automatic doors as a ground crew passed outside, and beneath it something antiseptic, something institutional, something that smelled like every airport terminal in every city Marcus had ever worked in. He guided the old man past a row of charging stations. He guided him past a cluster of delayed passengers sleeping across plastic chairs with their coats pulled over their faces. He guided him past a row of shops that were not yet open, their metal shutters pulled halfway down their interiors, dark and still. Then Marcus saw the luggage tag. It was attached to a large black VIP case sitting on a priority handling cart near the transfer desk. At a glance, it looked standard. At a glance, everything looked standard. But Marcus did not process things at a glance. He processed things completely automatically and without effort. His eyes caught the 12-digit routing code printed on the tag's lower panel. He read it once. He did not need to read it twice. The code was wrong, not slightly wrong, fatally wrong. A single transposed sequence in the routing number would send that case and the cargo manifest attached to it to a connecting hub in a different country. The downstream effect would cascade through 3 subsequent flights. It would create a logistical failure affecting 47 pieces of connecting luggage, 2 diplomatic pouches, and a medical equipment shipment flagged for priority arrival. Marcus knew this because he had memorized the routing architecture of this terminal's entire international transfer system. Not because anyone asked him to, because he had read it once and he did not forget things he had read. He stopped walking. He reached into the front pocket of his vest and pulled out a small, worn notebook. He uncapped a cheap red ballpoint pen. He stepped to the cart, crossed out the incorrect sequence with 3 clean strokes, and wrote the correct 12-digit code in small, precise letters above it. The old man watched him. "What did you just do?" he asked. "Fixed a routing error," Marcus said. He recapped the pen. He slid the notebook back into his pocket. Whoever typed that code transposed digits 9 and 10. The bag would have ended up in Frankfurt instead of Dubai. The old man was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "How did you know that?" "I read the terminal routing manual," Marcus said. "Last year. Once." The old man said nothing, but his eyes moved to Marcus's vest, to the name tag, to the faded embroidery that read, "Ramp Crew, Team 4." He looked back at Marcus's face with an expression that was not pity, not surprise, and not condescension. It was something closer to recognition. They kept walking. Marcus noticed as they moved that the old man's coat sleeve had ridden up slightly at the wrist. Beneath the frayed, dirty fabric there was a platinum watch. It caught the terminal light for only a moment before the sleeve fell back. Marcus registered it the way he registered everything. Without comment, without reaction, he simply stored it. Near gate 38, Marcus paused at a terminal information screen mounted on a pillar. He stopped because something on the screen was wrong. A compliance update notice had scrolled across the lower third of the display, and buried inside the standard regulatory language Marcus had seen a specific code. He pulled out his notebook again. He uncapped his pen again. He wrote the code down in careful, unhurried letters. FAA Reg 14 CFR Part 121.374 cross-referenced with Subpart L Amendment 2209. He stared at it. He underlined it. He capped his pen. The old man watched him again. "Another error?" he asked. "Not an error," Marcus said. "A compliance citation. Someone filed a software implementation that bypasses the cross-check requirement in this section." He tapped the notebook. "It's been active for at least 60 days based on the amendment date. That's a federal violation." The old man's expression did not change. "You read compliance codes on terminal screens." "I read everything," Marcus said. He put the notebook away. "It's not something I decided to do. It's just what happens when I look at something." They reached gate 47. Marcus pointed to the desk, confirmed the departure time, and made sure the old man had his boarding pass accessible in his hand. The man thanked him. He thanked him in the quiet, direct way of someone who was not accustomed to receiving help, and was choosing their words carefully because of that. Marcus turned to walk back. His break was over. It had been over for 4 minutes. He walked quickly, rolling his right shoulder, stretching the ache out of it as he moved. The jet fuel smell was stronger now. The cold air pressed against the coffee stain that was not yet there, against the skin that was not yet burned, against the shift schedule that was not yet torn. None of that had happened yet. But he had just memorized the exact compliance failure that would end a man's career. He had just written it down in a small, worn notebook that was currently riding in the front pocket of his neon yellow vest. And the old man he had just guided to gate 47 was watching him walk away with an expression that Marcus, for all his perfect memory, had not turned around to see. He kept walking. His knees ached. He had 6 hours and 41 minutes left on his shift. Marcus made it back to the ramp entrance in 4 minutes. He had his hand on the door. He was 3 steps from clocking back in. Then he heard the voice. It came from the concourse behind him, sharp and carrying the kind of voice trained by years of boardrooms and unchecked authority. It cut through the ambient noise of the terminal the way a fire alarm cuts through music. Loud, sudden, and entirely certain of its own importance. "What in the world is that doing in my terminal?" It was not a question. Trent Lawson did not ask questions. He issued verdicts. Marcus turned. Trent was standing 20 feet away in the main concourse corridor, his Italian loafers striking the polished marble floor with a clean, aggressive precision that echoed off every hard surface around him. Each step landed like a declaration. Each step said the same thing. "This floor belongs to me. This corridor belongs to me. Everything you are standing on belongs to me." He wore a charcoal suit that had been tailored to eliminate any suggestion of ordinary human proportion. His white shirt was open, one button at the collar. His espresso cup was in his right hand, small ceramic and perfectly balanced between 2 fingers, as if even the act of holding a cup required a certain elegance that other people could not be trusted to manage. He was not looking at Marcus. He was looking past Marcus at the old man at Elias, who had not yet reached his gate and had paused near a row of seats to adjust the strap on his bag. Behind Trent, 3 steps back and slightly to the left, a junior manager kept pace with the practiced, anxious efficiency of someone who had learned that falling behind meant consequences. He was young, clean-shaven, and holding a tablet with both hands like a shield. Trent stopped walking. He looked at the junior manager without turning his head. "Who authorized a vagrant access to the premium concourse?" The junior manager opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at his tablet. "I don't have a record of any authorization, Mr. Lawson. I can pull the security log if you need me to." "I don't need the log," Trent said. "I need it gone." He resumed walking. His loafers struck the marble, precise and rhythmic, unhurried, confident. The sound of them carried. Marcus heard it as a physical thing, not just a sound but a pressure. The repeated announcement of a man who had never once questioned his right to be the loudest presence in any room he entered. Trent reached Marcus first. He stopped. He looked at Marcus's vest, at the name tag, at the neon yellow polyester that had absorbed 4 hours of tarmac grime and was now standing inside a terminal it was apparently not supposed to be standing in. Trent's expression moved through contempt in the way water moves through a drain, quickly, without resistance, without any indication that the contempt required thought. "Ramp crew," Trent said. He said it the way a man identifies a stain on a carpet. "You are not authorized to be inside the terminal during your shift window." "I was assisting a passenger," Marcus said. His voice was level quiet and entirely without apology. Trent's jaw tightened. "You were assisting a passenger." He repeated the words slowly, as if testing their structural integrity and finding them insufficient. "You are a baggage handler. Your job is to move bags. Your job is not to escort street traffic through my premium concourse and pollute my terminal with whatever that is bringing in off the sidewalk." He gestured toward Elias with 2 fingers, a small dismissive flick of the wrist, the kind of gesture used to indicate furniture that needs to be moved to another room. Marcus said nothing. He stood still. His hands were at his sides, loose and open. His breathing did not change. Trent took 1 step closer. I was not a tall man, but proximity was its own form of pressure, and he understood that. The bitter roasted smell of his espresso moved with him, rich and expensive and entirely out of place on a ramp worker's skin. The terminal's air conditioning pressed down on everything sterile and indifferent, chilling the sweat on the back of Marcus's neck under his collar. "You think this is impressive?" Trent's voice dropped slightly, not softer, quieter in the specific way that carries more threat than volume. "Playing tour guide for a homeless man in my terminal. You think that makes you something?" He glanced back at his junior manager. His expression shifted into something that was almost amusement, a performance of amusement designed for an audience of 1. "You know what this new routing software is going to do?" He did not wait for an answer. $50 million. $50 million saved in the next 18 months by cutting unnecessary FAA red tape that has been strangling this airline's operational efficiency for a decade. He turned back to Marcus. "That is what innovation looks like. That is what running an airline looks like, not this." The junior manager nodded. He nodded with the full committed energy of a man whose continued employment depended on the quality of his nodding. Marcus looked at Trent. He did not look at the suit or the espresso or the loafers. He looked at Trent's face directly and without blinking, and in the front pocket of his vest his hand found the shape of his notebook. Unnecessary FAA red tape. He had written the citation down 11 minutes ago. FAA Reg 14 CFR Part 121.374 Subpart L Amendment 2209. He had underlined it. He had not needed to underline it. He would not forget it whether he underlined it or not, but he had underlined it anyway. Trent set his espresso cup down on the edge of a nearby courtesy counter. He straightened his cuffs. He looked at Marcus one more time with the flat, concluding expression of a man issuing a final administrative determination. "Get back on the tarmac," Trent said, "and take that with you." He gestured again at Elias. "If I see either of you in this concourse again, you're done. Both of you." He picked up his espresso. He walked away. His loafers struck the marble clean and rhythmic and certain. The junior manager followed, tablet pressed to his chest, eyes forward. Marcus stood at the ramp entrance. The cold air moved around him. The noise of the terminal moved around him. He exhaled once slow and quiet through his nose. He did not move for 4 seconds. Then he turned. He looked back at Elias, who had watched the entire exchange from near the row of seats without moving, without reacting, without any visible expression. The platinum watch was hidden again beneath the frayed sleeve. The sharp eyes were calm. Entirely remarkably calm. Marcus gave a small nod in the direction of Gate 47. Elias returned the nod. He picked up his bag and walked on. Marcus pushed through the ramp door. The cold terminal air gave way to the wet, heavy, jet fuel-soaked air of the tarmac. He heard the door close behind him. He heard the rain. He rolled his shoulder once and walked back to his crew. He had 6 hours and 22 minutes left on his shift. He did not know what was coming in the next 40 minutes.
Wait. Absolutely not. He poured scalding coffee on a hard-working man just for helping a stranger, while a whole crew of grown adults stood there and watched. If that were me, I wouldn't have been able to keep my hands at my sides. Imagine standing on that tarmac, taking that kind of physical abuse just to keep a paycheck. The audacity is sickening.
The floodlights mounted above the ramp doors threw pale, wet circles of light across the asphalt that shimmered and broke apart every time the wind shifted. Marcus was back at his station. He was moving bags. That was the job. Lift, carry, load, repeat. 50 pounds, 60 pounds, 45 pounds. The weight varied, but the motion did not. His knees registered every one. His lower back registered every one. He had learned over 4 years on this crew not to think about the weight as it was happening. I thought about other things. He let his hands and his back and his legs do the work while his mind stayed somewhere quieter. He was thinking about the compliance code when he heard the door. The ramp access door from the terminal swung open hard. It struck the exterior wall with a metallic bang that cut through the rain. Marcus did not stop working. He did not turn around immediately, but he heard the loafers. Even through the rain, even through the engine noise from the taxiing aircraft 2 gates over, he heard the sharp, deliberate impact of leather soles on wet asphalt. Nobody on a ramp crew wore leather soles. He set down the bag in his hands. He turned. Trent Lawson was walking toward him across the tarmac, espresso cup in hand, suit jacket already darkening at the shoulders from the rain. He was not hurrying. He did not hurry. Hurrying suggested that external conditions had authority over your behavior, and Trent Lawson did not grant external conditions that authority. He walked at his own pace through the rain across the wet asphalt with the unhurried, deliberate stride of a man who had decided that something needed to be handled and had come personally to handle it. Behind him, the 6 other members of Marcus's ramp crew had stopped working. They stood in a loose, silent cluster near the baggage cart. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The rain fell on all of them equally. Trent stopped 4 feet from Marcus. He looked at him. He looked at the wet vest, the scuffed boots, the rain running down the back of Marcus's collar. His expression was not angry in the immediate reactive sense. It was something colder and more deliberate than anger. It was the expression of a man who had already decided the outcome and was now simply executing it. "I told you," Trent said. His voice carried easily over the rain. "I told you to stay on the tarmac." "I am on the tarmac," Marcus said. Trent's jaw moved once. "You were in my terminal. You were in my terminal with a vagrant in front of passengers representing this airline in a vest that looks like you pulled it from a construction site dumpster." He took 1 step forward. "I told you once, you are paid to move bags. That is the beginning and the end of your function here. You do not escort. You do not assist. You do not interact with terminal passengers. You move bags." Marcus said nothing. He stood with his hands at his sides, open and still. "I had to walk back through my own concourse," Trent continued, his voice dropping to a lower register that was worse than shouting, more controlled, more precise, and more personal, "and explained to 2 premium passengers why a ramp employee was wandering my terminal like he owned it." He paused. "Do you understand how that reflects on this operation?" "I helped a passenger find his gate," Marcus said. His voice was flat and clean. "That's it." "That," Trent said, "is not your job." He reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a folded paper. Marcus recognized it immediately. It was his shift schedule, the printed day sheet that the crew lead had distributed at 4 that morning, his name across the top, his assignments listed in order. Trent held it up between 2 fingers. He looked at it. He looked at Marcus. Then he tore it. He tore it cleanly in half once across the middle, then again, lengthwise, and then again until 4 pieces of wet paper fell from his fingers and landed on the asphalt at Marcus's feet. The rain flattened them immediately against the dark surface. Nobody moved. The 6 ramp workers stood in their cluster and looked at the ground. One of them shifted his weight. That was all. Marcus looked at the pieces of paper on the asphalt. He looked at them the way you look at something that has already happened and cannot be made to unhappen, calmly, completely, without flinching. Then Trent raised the espresso cup. He did it without ceremony, without hesitation, without any of the dramatic telegraphing that might have given Marcus time to step back. He simply tilted the cup forward and poured. The coffee came out in a dark, steaming arc, hit the neon yellow polyester of Marcus's safety vest at the center of his chest, and spread outward, hot, immediately shockingly hot through the thin fabric. The heat reached his skin in under a second, a burning concentrated pressure that moved from his sternum to his ribs before the coffee began to cool and run downward. The dark stain bloomed across the bright vest. It spread in all directions at once, irregular and total the way ink spreads across wet paper. The neon yellow disappeared beneath it in a widening circle. Marcus did not step back. He did not raise his hands. He did not make a sound. He stood exactly where he had been standing and absorbed it, absorbing it the way a wall absorbs something thrown against it. Still, unmoving, entirely present. The rain fell. The engines turned over in the distance. The 6 ramp workers looked at the asphalt. Trent lowered the empty cup. He looked at Marcus's chest with the flat, satisfied expression of a man who had just completed a necessary administrative task. "Clean yourself up," he said. His voice was entirely calm, entirely conversational. "If I see you near the terminal again, you're done. Do you understand me? You are done." He turned. His loafers struck the wet asphalt. He walked back toward the ramp door. Marcus stood on the wet tarmac. The coffee soaked through the polyester, through the thin cotton layer beneath it, and settled against his skin in a spreading, fading warmth. The rain began to cool it almost immediately, replacing the heat with something colder. He felt both at once, the burn and the cold, the burn and the cold. He did not wipe the coffee off. He did not look at his crew. He did not watch Trent walk away. He reached into his pocket. His fingers found the notebook. He felt the familiar cardboard cover, soft at the corners from months of handling, warm from his body heat. He did not take it out. He just held it, his hand wrapped around it, his thumb resting on the edge where the pages fanned slightly outward. Then he raised his eyes. He looked across the tarmac, past the baggage carts, past the rain-soaked ground crew equipment, past the painted service lines on the asphalt. He looked at the aircraft parked at gate 11. He looked at the tail. He read the registration number printed there in large regulation-mandated characters. He read it once. He stored it. He would not need to look at it again. The notebook stayed in his pocket. The coffee stain spread across his chest. The rain fell on everything equitably and without preference, on the ruined vest and the Italian suit jacket, disappearing through the ramp door, and the 6 pairs of work boots that had not moved an inch. Marcus exhaled. One breath. Slow and measured and quiet. He bent down. He picked up a bag. He lifted it. He loaded it. He reached for the next one. He had 6 hours and 1 minute left on his shift. The notebook was in his pocket. The tail number was in his memory. And somewhere inside the terminal, a man in a frayed coat with a platinum watch was sitting at gate 47, holding a luggage tag that a ramp worker had corrected from pure memory. Trent had signed something today. He had not known he was signing it. But Marcus had been keeping records since 4 in the morning, and records, unlike shift schedules, could not be torn in half and dropped in the rain. Wait. Absolutely not. He poured scalding coffee on a hard-working man just for helping a stranger, while a whole crew of grown adults stood there and watched. If that were me, I wouldn't have been able to keep my hands at my sides. Imagine standing on that tarmac, taking that kind of physical abuse just to keep a paycheck. The audacity is sickening. The rain had not stopped. It pressed down on the tarmac in a steady, relentless curtain, collecting in dark pools along the painted service lines and running in thin rivers toward the drainage grates at the edge of the apron. The floodlights above the ramp doors caught the rain at an angle that made it look solid, like static on an old television screen, like something that had always been there and would continue to be there indefinitely. Marcus kept working. He did not speak to his crew. His crew did not speak to him. The 6 ramp workers moved around him in a careful, deliberate silence, the kind of silence that is not accidental but chosen, maintained with conscious effort by people who had decided that the safest distance from what had just happened was a physical one. They loaded bags. They moved carts. They kept their eyes on their own hands and their own work, and the ground immediately in front of their own boots. Marcus understood it. He did not resent it. I had been on crews before in other cities at other terminals, and he knew exactly what silence meant when it followed something like that. It did not mean indifference. It meant fear, quiet, practical, and completely rational fear of a man who wore Italian loafers and held someone's livelihood between 2 fingers, the same way he had held that shift schedule before tearing it apart over wet asphalt. He set down a bag. He straightened. He reached into his pocket. He took out the notebook. He uncapped the red pen. He pressed the tip to a clean page and he wrote. He wrote in the careful, precise, unhurried script he always used when recording something that mattered. He did not look around while he wrote. He did not check whether anyone was watching. He simply wrote because what was in his head needed to be on paper, not for his own memory. He did not need paper for his own memory, but because paper could be handed to someone. Paper could be submitted. Paper could become evidence. He wrote 3 lines. The first line was the compliance code he had copied from the terminal screen near Gate 38. FAA Reg 14 CFR Part 121.374 Subpart L Amendment 2209. The second line was the tail number of the aircraft at Gate 11, which he had read from across the tarmac through rain and poor light without difficulty. The third line was the exact phrase Trent had used in the concourse, spoken loudly and without any apparent concern for who might hear it. $50 million saved by cutting unnecessary FAA red tape. He put quotation marks around it. He underlined it once. He added the time, 9:14, and the location North Concourse Corridor Gate 38 proximity. He capped the pen. He looked at the 3 lines. They were not an accusation. They were not a complaint. They were a record, factual, dated, and specific, the kind of record that in the right hands and in the right context became something with mass and consequence. Marcus had learned this early. He had learned it from watching what happened to people who shouted and what happened to people who documented. Shouting dispersed into air, documentation accumulated. He was putting the notebook back into his pocket when he heard Trent's voice again. What is he doing? The voice came from the ramp access door, which had opened again without Marcus hearing it over the rain. Trent was standing in the frame of the door, dry composed, his jacket now fully darkened at the shoulders, but his expression unchanged. His espresso cup replaced by a phone held loosely in one hand. He was looking at Marcus with an expression that had moved past contempt into something more administrative, something operational. Behind him, 2 airport security guards stepped out onto the tarmac. They were large, uniformed, and carried themselves with the specific physical authority of people who were accustomed to being the largest presence in any situation. They paused at the threshold, waiting. Trent walked forward 3 steps. He looked at the notebook in Marcus's hand, at the red pen, at the careful, unhurried posture of a man who had just been publicly humiliated and was apparently responding to that humiliation by writing something in a small notepad in the rain. "What are you writing?" Trent said. It was not curiosity. It was the tone of a man identifying a problem he had not anticipated and was now calculating how to eliminate. "Notes," Marcus said. "Notes." Trent repeated the word with the same structural skepticism he had applied to everything Marcus said. "You are standing on my tarmac covered in coffee writing notes." He almost laughed. The almost was important. The almost meant he had stopped himself because laughing would suggest that this was something worth finding amusing, and Trent had already decided it was not. "You can barely read and you're standing here pretending to write something." Marcus did not respond to that. He looked at Trent. He looked at him with the same direct, steady attention he had been giving him all morning. Not challenging, not submissive, simply present fully and completely present the way a recording device is present. "You want to write notes," Trent said, his voice dropping into the lower, quieter register that was worse than shouting. "Write this down. You are terminated effective immediately. Write that down." He turned to the security guards and made a small, decisive gesture with 2 fingers. "Hold him by the gate. The FAA director is finishing his inspection tour. I want him processed and off the property before that's done. I don't want this." He gestured at Marcus. "Anywhere near a federal official." The 2 guards came forward. They were not rough. They were not gentle either. They were efficient, practiced, and entirely impersonal, the physical expression of an institutional decision that had already been made and simply needed to be carried out. One of them placed a hand on Marcus's left shoulder. One placed a hand on his right. The grip was firm, positioned, and total. Marcus did not resist. He did not speak. He did not look at his crew, who had stopped working completely now and were standing in a loose, still line near the baggage cart, watching with the careful, non-committal attention of people who wanted to see without being seen to see. He allowed the guards to turn him. He allowed them to begin walking him toward the chain-link perimeter fence at the far end of the apron, away from the gate, away from the aircraft, away from the terminal. As he walked, he reached into his pocket. He felt the notebook. He felt the pen. He felt the small, exact rectangular weight of 6 months of careful observation recorded in his own hand in precise script on cheap paper in a vest that smelled like coffee and rain and jet fuel and 4 years of work that apparently amounted to nothing. He felt all of that. He held all of that. He did not let go of it. The rain fell. His boots moved across the wet asphalt in the same quiet, rubber-soled shuffle that made no sound against any surface marble or tarmac terminal or apron. Behind him, the thin, frantic buzz of Trent's voice bounced off the aluminum fuselage of the aircraft at gate 11, sharp and bright and completely certain of itself. Ahead of him was the chain-link fence, cold, wet, industrial. The kind of boundary that exists not to keep anything out but to make clear where permission ends. Marcus walked toward it. His notebook was in his pocket. His memory was intact. His knees ached. He had 6 things written down, and one of them was going to end a career. He did not yet know whose hands the notebook would reach. He did not yet know that 3 black federal SUVs were already pulling off the service road 200 meters away, moving slowly and deliberately across the wet asphalt toward the apron. He did not know any of that yet, but he kept walking steady and quiet and entirely calm toward the fence, toward the cold rain, toward whatever came next. The chain-link fence was cold. Marcus felt it through the back of his vest, through the wet polyester, through the thin cotton beneath it. The 2 guards had positioned him against it with the practiced efficiency of people who did this regularly, who understood the geometry of containment, who knew exactly how much pressure to apply and exactly where to apply it to make a person stay in one place without making it look like force. One stood to his left, one stood to his right. Their arms were not raised. Their hands were not on him anymore. They simply stood there, large and uniformed and close, bracketing him against the fence the way parentheses bracket something that needs to be separated from the rest of the sentence. The rain fell on all 3 of them. Marcus looked out across the tarmac. He could see his crew from here. They were 30 meters away near the baggage cart, resumed now in their work, heads down, hands moving, boots quiet on the wet asphalt. Not one of them looked in his direction. Not one of them had looked in his direction since the guards had walked him away. He watched them for a moment. He watched their shoulders, their backs, their careful, deliberate avoidance of his side of the apron. He understood it. He had already told himself he understood it back when the silence first started, back when the coffee was still hot on his chest. He had told himself it was fear. Rational, practical, entirely human fear. He had told himself that, and he had believed it, and he believed it still. But belief and feeling were not always the same thing. The fence pressed cold and wet against his back. The coffee stain on his vest had gone dark and stiff in the rain, the neon yellow beneath it visible only at the edges, now a bright border around a dark center. His knees throbbed. His shoulder throbbed. The burning across his chest where the coffee had hit had dulled to a low, persistent ache that sat underneath everything else like a bass note, constant and unignorable. He thought about the first bag he had lifted that morning. 4:17 a.m. A black rolling case, 60 pounds at least, belonging to a passenger whose name he had not known and would never know. He had lifted it cleanly, loaded it correctly, moved on to the next one. He had done that for 4 years, thousands of bags. Tens of thousands of bags lifted, loaded, moved, unloaded, delivered, sorted, rerouted, corrected when they were wrong, flagged when they needed flagging, managed with a precision and a memory that no one in this terminal, not one single person in an office or a boardroom or a tailored Italian suit had ever once asked about or acknowledged or considered worth understanding. He thought about the routing error he had corrected that morning, the 12-digit code, the transposed digits, the 47 pieces of connecting luggage, the 2 diplomatic pouches, the medical shipment. He had fixed it with a red pen in 30 seconds during a walk he had not been scheduled to take. Nobody would ever know that. Nobody would ever file a report that said a ramp worker caught a fatal routing error from memory and corrected it before it cascaded into an international logistical disaster. That was not the kind of thing that ended up in reports. That was the kind of thing that simply did not happen as far as the record was concerned, because the person who made it not happen wore a neon yellow vest and was currently pinned against a chain-link fence in the rain. He thought about his notebook. He could feel it in his pocket. He thought about the 3 lines he had written. He thought about the compliance code, the tail number, the exact quoted phrase in quotation marks with the time and location noted beneath it. I thought about how long he had been watching, recording, noticing things that no one else was positioned to notice because no one else spent 11 hours a day inside the operational infrastructure of this terminal with a photographic memory and nothing to prove. He thought about what any of that was worth right now. Against a chain link fence, in the rain, terminated, with 6 coworkers 30 meters away who were looking at the ground. The answer arrived without drama. It sat in his chest alongside the ache from the coffee burn. Quiet, heavy, real. It was worth nothing. Not today. Not like this. Not to anyone who had the authority to make it matter. He closed his eyes. He kept them closed for 3 seconds, deliberate and private, a small and complete moment of stillness inside the rain and the engine noise and the cold. He did not pray. He did not catastrophize. He simply allowed himself to know exactly how bad this was fully and without softening, because he had learned over a long time and in hard ways that looking directly at the worst version of a thing was the only method that actually worked. Softening it just delayed the weight. Looking at it directly meant you could start carrying it. He opened his eyes. He saw the SUVs. 3 of them. Black, large, unmarked, moving in a slow and deliberate single file across the service road at the far edge of the apron. They had come through the restricted access gate near the maintenance hangar, which meant they had credentials, which meant they were federal or law enforcement or both. They moved without urgency, but with the specific, unhurried purpose of vehicles that did not need to hurry because their authority was already established before they arrived. The guard to Marcus's left saw them too. He straightened slightly. The guard to his right turned his head. Both of them went very still in the way that people go still when something has arrived that outranks them and they are waiting to understand what that means for their current assignment. The lead SUV stopped first, then the second, then the third. All 3 sat on the wet asphalt with their engines running, their headlights cutting pale columns through the rain. For a moment nothing happened. The rain fell. The engines idled. The tarmac held its breath. Then the door of the lead SUV opened. A man stepped out. He was not wearing a frayed coat. He was not shuffling or hesitant or lost. He wore a crisp, dark federal suit, fitted and exact, and he moved across the wet asphalt with the quiet, total authority of someone who had been moving through restricted spaces his entire professional life and had never once needed to announce himself to do it. Marcus recognized the sharp, clear eyes first, then the posture, then the platinum watch now fully visible, catching the tarmac floodlights on his left wrist as he reached back into the SUV and retrieved something from the seat beside him. It was a luggage tag, small, rectangular, and white, with 3 clean lines of handwriting across its lower panel written in red ballpoint ink. Elias Sterling held it in his right hand loosely at his side as he walked toward the tarmac. Behind Marcus, the 2 security guards had gone entirely motionless. They were no longer bracketing anything. They were simply standing in the rain watching a federal official cross their apron and quietly, privately recalculating the nature of the situation they were currently standing inside. Marcus did not move. He stood against the fence. The coffee stain was dark on his chest. The notebook was in his pocket. His knees ached. He watched Elias walk. He watched him move past the baggage carts, past the silent, frozen crew of 6 ramp workers, past the painted service lines and the pooled rain and the pale floodlight circles on the wet asphalt. Elias was not looking at the crew. He was not looking at the guards. He was not looking at the terminal or the aircraft or anything on his left or his right. He was looking directly at Marcus. And in his right hand, held loosely at his side, was a piece of paper that a ramp worker had corrected from memory at 7:43 that morning during a walk he had not been scheduled to take with a cheap red pen while his knees ached and his brake ticked away. And nobody in this entire terminal had thought to ask why a baggage handler knew a 12-digit aviation routing code by heart. The fence was still cold against Marcus's back. The rain was still falling. The engines of 3 federal SUVs were still running on the wet asphalt behind the most powerful aviation regulator in the country. Everything was about to change. It had not changed yet, but it was about to, and Marcus could feel it the way you feel. A pressure shift in the air before a storm breaks, not the storm itself, just the moment before it. That single suspended second when everything is still in place and nothing has moved yet and the whole world is leaning forward. He straightened his back. He lifted his chin. He stood away from the fence. He was ready. Elias did not look at Trent. That was the first thing. That was the thing that mattered before anything else happened, before a single word was spoken, or a single credential was presented, or a single consequence was set in motion. Trent Lawson was standing at the ramp access door, having emerged from the terminal at the sound of federal vehicles on his tarmac, and he was already moving forward, already adjusting his expression into the practiced, warm executive welcome that he deployed for people who outranked him. His hand was coming up. His shoulders were squaring. His jaw was arranging itself into something that suggested collaborative professionalism and mutual respect. Elias walked past him. Not around him. Past him. The way you walk past a column or a piece of load-bearing infrastructure. Functional, acknowledged at the level of spatial awareness and entirely beside the point. Trent's hand stayed up for 1 full second after Elias had already moved beyond him. Then it came down. His expression did not collapse. It did not have time to collapse. It simply reset quickly and without grace into something more neutral, more watchful, more uncertain. He turned and followed 2 steps behind, recalibrating. Elias crossed the wet asphalt in a straight, unhurried line. His federal suit absorbed the rain without comment. His shoes moved through the shallow water, pooled along the painted service lines without slowing. Behind him, 2 additional federal agents had stepped out of the second and third SUVs and positioned themselves at a loose, wide angle across the apron, not blocking anything, not threatening anything. Simply present the way federal authority is often simply present, as a fact, rather than an action. He stopped in front of Marcus. He looked at him for a moment. He looked at the coffee stain, dark and stiff, across the center of the neon yellow vest. He looked at the scuffed boots, the wet collar, the rain running down the back of Marcus's neck. He looked at all of it with the same sharp, clear, unhurried attention that had been watching Marcus from behind a frayed coat sleeve since 7:43 that morning. "Are you the one," Elias said, "who caught the fatal routing error?" His voice was quiet. It was not loud enough to perform for anyone else on the tarmac. It was directed entirely at Marcus, specific and direct, and expecting a specific and direct answer. "Yes," Marcus said. Elias held up the luggage tag. He held it between 2 fingers, face outward, so that the handwriting in red ballpoint ink was visible. 3 lines. A corrected routing code written cleanly over a crossed-out error in the precise, unhurried script of a man who wrote things down because they mattered, not because anyone was watching. "This is your handwriting," Elias said. "Yes," Marcus said. Elias looked at it for one more moment. Then he lowered it. He looked at Marcus with an expression that was not warmth and was not formality, but was something between them, something that functioned like recognition, the specific recognition of one precise mind identifying another. "Tell me what you know," Elias said. Marcus reached into his pocket. He took out the notebook. He opened it to the page he had written on that morning near Gate 38 in the rain, while a junior manager stood behind a man in an Italian suit and nodded at everything the man said. He held the notebook at a natural reading angle, and he began. He did not read from the notebook, he recited. The notebook was there as a physical record, a document that could be submitted and entered and verified, but the information came from memory, clean and complete, and in exact sequence, the way water comes from a tap. He did not pause. He did not search. He did not qualify or hedge or soften. He cited FAA Reg 14 CFR Part 121 374 Subpart L Amendment 22-9 Subpart L. He described the specific function of the cross-check requirement that the regulation mandated and the specific mechanism by which Trent's new routing software bypassed it. He identified the bypass as deliberate, not incidental, based on the architecture of the software's exception parameters, which he had observed on the operational display screen in the terminal's logistics coordination hub during a period when the screen was visible from the corridor near Gate 38. He noted that the software had been active for a minimum of 60 days, based on the amendment date visible in the compliance update notice. He cited the tail number of the aircraft at Gate 11, which was currently loaded with passengers and scheduled for departure in 38 minutes, as the most immediate operational risk. He noted that the routing error on the VIP luggage tag he had corrected that morning was consistent with the class of error that the bypassed cross-check requirement existed specifically to prevent. He stopped. He closed the notebook. He held it at his side. The tarmac was very quiet. The rain was still falling, but it seemed in that specific moment to fall more quietly than it had been falling before, as if the weight of what had just been recited had altered the acoustic properties of the air around it. The 6 ramp workers near the baggage cart had stopped moving entirely. They were not pretending to work anymore. They were simply standing motionless in the rain, listening to something they had not expected to hear come out of the mouth of the man they had watched get covered in coffee 40 minutes ago. Trent had moved forward during the recitation. He had moved forward gradually, incrementally, in the way that people move toward a conversation that concerns them when they have not been invited into it. He was now standing 6 feet behind Elias's left shoulder. His tablet was in his hand. Its screen showed the operational dashboard of his new routing software, the glowing, expensive, meticulously designed digital interface that had cost his airline 4 months and several $1 million in development fees and had been presented to the board as the most significant efficiency innovation in the company's operational history. His face had changed color. It had not done it dramatically or suddenly. It had done it the way chalk does when it gets wet, gradually, evenly losing its brightness from the surface inward until what remained was a dull, flat, grayish white that had forgotten it was ever any other color. "That's," Trent said. He stopped. He started again. "That analysis is incomplete. The software was reviewed. It was reviewed internally, and the cross-check modification was approved as a valid operational variance under the cost-efficiency framework that the board authorized in January." He held up his tablet. His hand was not entirely steady. "I have documentation. I have internal sign-off from 3 department heads and a legal review that confirms the modification falls within acceptable operational parameters." Elias did not turn to look at him. He kept his eyes on Marcus for one additional moment. Then slowly he turned. He looked at Trent. He looked at the tablet. He looked at the suit, the loafers, the espresso-stained fingers, the expensive certainty of a man who had spent his entire career in rooms where his conclusions were the last ones recorded. "Internal sign-off," Elias said, "does not constitute FAA authorization." Trent opened his mouth. He closed it. Subpart L Amendment 2209 is not a red tape provision. Elias continued. His voice had not risen. It had not needed to rise. "It exists because a cross-check failure of the type your software bypasses caused a cargo misrouting event in 2019 that resulted in 3 fatalities and $11 million in federal liability. The amendment was drafted specifically to prevent recurrence. Bypassing it is not an operational variance. It is a federal violation." He paused. "You called it unnecessary red tape." Trent's jaw moved. His eyes moved to Marcus, then back to Elias, then to a point somewhere between them that was not occupied by anything. Elias looked at him with the quiet, total attention of a man who had spent 30 years identifying exactly this kind of calculation. The calculation that decided a regulation was an obstacle rather than a protection that decided the people most harmed by the removal of that protection were too far from the boardroom to matter. "You are polluting my tarmac," Elias said. He said it without heat, without satisfaction, with the same flat measured precision that Trent had used in the concourse that morning to say something almost identical to a man in a neon yellow vest who had not responded, who had not flinched, who had simply reached into his pocket and written something down. Trent heard it. Every person on that tarmac heard it. The 6 ramp workers heard it. The 2 airport security guards heard it. The federal agents at the edge of the apron heard it. The rain heard it. Trent's tablet dropped slightly in his hand. The glowing screen, the expensive interface, the $50 million innovation tilted toward the wet asphalt at an angle that suggested the grip holding it was no longer entirely reliable. Marcus stood in front of the chain-link fence. The notebook was at his side. The coffee stain was on his chest. His knees ached. He had not smiled. He had not raised his voice. He had not looked at Trent with triumph or with anger or with any of the things he had every right to feel and had chosen deliberately and at considerable cost to himself not to perform. He had simply told the truth, accurately, completely, from memory. That was all he had ever done. And it had been, as it turned out, more than enough. Elias turned back to Marcus. He did it without hurry, without drama, without any of the performative gravity that the moment might have invited. He simply turned the way a man turns when he has finished one thing and is ready to begin the next, and he looked at Marcus with the same direct, unhurried attention he had been giving him since he stepped out of the lead SUV and crossed the wet tarmac with a luggage tag in his hand. "Walk me through the statutes," Elias said. Marcus opened the notebook. This time he read from it not because he needed to, but because the record needed to be verbally tied to its physical document in the presence of a federal official. He began with the primary violation. FAA Reg 14 CFR Part 121.374 Subpart L Amendment 2209 Active Bypass Minimum 60 Days Confirmed by Compliance Update Timestamp Visible on Terminal Display. He moved to the secondary violation. 14 CFR Part 121.135 Operational Manual Amendment Requirements, specifically the obligation to file any software modification affecting routing cross-checks with the regional FAA office within 30 days of implementation. He moved to the third. 14 CFR Part 119.65, the management personnel requirement that mandates a director of operations hold current knowledge of all active federal compliance obligations. He noted that Trent had publicly and explicitly described a known federal compliance requirement as unnecessary red tape in the presence of crew members and a junior manager, which constituted documented evidence of willful disregard rather than inadvertent non-compliance. He closed the notebook. He looked at Elias. Elias was quiet for 4 seconds. He was not processing. He had processed it during the recitation. The 4 seconds were something else. They were the pause of a man who had spent 30 years in federal aviation enforcement and had learned to take a brief private moment before the consequences began, because consequences once set in motion did not pause. Then he turned to the senior federal agent standing to his right. He said 7 words. "Ground the fleet. All aircraft, effective now." The agent nodded once. He raised his radio. He spoke into it briefly with the compact procedural efficiency of someone delivering an instruction that had been anticipated and prepared for and simply needed the authorization to begin. Somewhere inside the terminal in the Operations Control Center on the Air Traffic Coordination System and the Gate Management Network, things began to happen. Not loudly, not visibly from the tarmac. But they happen systematically and irreversibly, the way federal authority always happens when it has been properly invoked by the right person at the right time with the right documentation in hand. Trent heard the radio. He heard the 7 words before the radio. His tablet was still tilted at that unreliable angle, its screen still glowing, its expensive interface still displaying the operational dashboard of a software system that had just become the primary exhibit in a federal enforcement action. He stepped forward. He stepped forward with the energy of a man who still believed at some level, beneath reason and beneath evidence, that forward motion was equivalent to control. "You cannot ground this fleet," Trent said. His voice had lost its lower register. It had lost the quiet, controlled precision that had been its primary instrument all morning. What remained was higher, thinner, and faster. "This fleet operates 47 routes. There are 11,000 passengers booked on departures in the next 6 hours. You cannot do this on the basis of one employee's verbal recitation from a pocket notebook. You cannot." Elias looked at him. "I can," he said. "I just did." Trent's mouth stayed open. The words that were supposed to follow did not arrive. He looked at Elias. He looked at Marcus. He looked at his tablet, at the glowing dashboard, at the routes and the aircraft and the departure times and the $50 million in projected savings that had been presented to the board in January as the beginning of a new operational era. He looked at all of it. Then his knees bent. It happened slowly in stages without any single decisive moment. First his weight shifted, then his shoulders dropped. Then his knees bent and he went down onto the wet asphalt in the dark, expensive fabric of his Italian suit, and he stayed there. The rain fell on him. It fell on the tailored shoulders, on the perfect collar, on the loafers that had struck every hard surface that morning with such precise and deliberate authority. Nobody moved toward him. Nobody spoke. Marcus looked at him for a moment. He looked at him without triumph and without pity and without any of the performances that the sight of a powerful man on his knees tends to invite. He looked at him the way he looked at everything, directly, completely, and then he looked away because there was nothing more to see there. Elias reached into the inner pocket of his federal jacket. He removed a credential wallet. From it he extracted a card, small, formal, and printed on heavy stock with the FAA seal in the upper left corner. He held it toward his senior agent, who produced a compact document case and opened it. Elias removed a single-page form pre-printed with fields for a license number, a name, and a revocation authority signature. He filled it in. He used a pen from his own pocket, not a red ballpoint, but a heavy, dark instrument that moved across the paper with the weight of institutional finality. He signed it. He dated it. He handed it to his agent. "Trent Lawson," he said. He did not look up from the document as he said it. "Aviation management license revoked effective today, pending formal federal review. You are to have no operational authority over any commercial aviation asset, route, crew, or facility until that review is concluded." He looked up. "Your badge." The two airport security guards, the same two who had walked Marcus to the fence 40 minutes ago, who had bracketed him against the chain link and stood in the rain waiting for instructions, stepped forward now. They moved to Trent. One of them reached toward the platinum corporate badge on Trent's lapel, the one with his name and his title and the airline logo embossed in the lower corner. He unclipped it. He held it for a moment. Then he passed it to Elias's agent, who placed it in the document case and closed the clasp. Trent watched it go. He was still on his knees. He watched the badge disappear into the document case with an expression that had moved past shock, past calculation, past all the intermediate states into something simpler and more final. Something that recognized without any remaining argument available to contest it, that it was over. Marcus stood on the tarmac. He stood in the rain in his stained vest, in his scuffed boots, with his notebook in his hand and his knees aching, and 6 hours and 1 minute of a shift that no longer existed behind him. He stood and he watched, and he was quiet. Elias walked back to him. He stopped 2 feet away. He looked at Marcus with the direct, clear expression that had been his only consistent expression all morning through the frayed coat and the terminal and the SUV and everything that had followed. "I have a position," Elias said. "Federal Logistics Coordinator, Great Lakes Regional Office. It involves compliance monitoring, routing system audits, and operational irregularity assessment across 14 commercial terminals." He paused. "It requires someone who can read a routing code on a display screen from a corridor, catch a 12-digit transposition error from memory, and cite 3 federal statutes in sequence from a pocket notebook under pressure." He looked at Marcus steadily. "I don't think I need to tell you that that is not a common skill set." Marcus was quiet for a moment. The rain fell. The engines of the 3 SUVs idled on the wet asphalt behind them. "No," Marcus said. "It isn't. The position pays 4 times your current rate," Elias said. "It comes with federal benefits, a regional travel allowance, and the kind of institutional authority that means the next person who tries to pour something on you will need a lawyer before they finish the motion." He held out his hand. "I'd like you to consider it." Marcus looked at the hand. He looked at it for 1 full second, a single, complete, unhurried second, the way he looked at everything he was about to commit to memory. Then he took it. The handshake was brief and firm and entirely without ceremony. Behind Marcus, the 6 ramp workers stood in a line near the baggage cart. They had not moved in several minutes. They stood in the rain in their vests and their boots, and they watched Marcus shake the hand of a federal director on a tarmac that had 40 minutes ago been the site of their silence. They watched him become in one quiet handshake something that none of them had been in a position to protect him from becoming, and that all of them now understood they had failed to protect him from nearly not becoming. Nobody said anything. There was nothing to say. Trent was still on his knees. His clipboard, the one he had been carrying all morning, the one with the operational schedules and the route projections and the cost-saving metrics that had been his primary instrument of authority, had slipped from his hand at some point and lay face down on the wet asphalt beside him. The rain was soaking through it. The pages were softening. The numbers were beginning to run. Marcus picked up his notebook. He capped his pen. He slid both into the front pocket of his vest next to the place where the coffee stain had dried into the polyester in a dark, permanent ring. He looked at the coffee stain for 1 moment. He looked at it the way you look at something that tried to diminish you and failed, without anger, without sentiment, with simple, clear acknowledgement of what it was and what it had not managed to do. Then he looked at Trent, who was still kneeling on the wet asphalt with the rain falling on his Italian suit, and he said quietly and without heat and without any particular emphasis exactly 7 words. "You're paid to move bags," Marcus said. "Not run an airline." He did not wait for a response. There was no response available to give. He turned and he walked toward the lead SUV where Elias's agent was holding the rear door open against the rain, and the tarmac behind him held everything it had just witnessed. The wet asphalt, the grounded fleet, the deactivated badge, the 6 standing witnesses, the kneeling man, the running numbers. All of it stayed exactly where it was. All of it would stay exactly where it was for a very long time. Marcus got into the car. The door closed. The rain fell on everything equally. It always had. That feeling of watching an arrogant, unchecked elitist lose their entire empire to the blue-collar worker they deemed inferior, that is pure righteous vindication. If you were in Marcus's boots, dripping with hot coffee and holding the hidden power to end a man's career, could you have stayed that terrifyingly calm and let your intellect do the talking? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story hit you in the chest, share it with someone who needs a reminder that true intellect doesn't wear a suit, and subscribe for the next story.